time, just to remember where we were discussing what happens when we have basically a solid surface which is charged with a density of charge sigma, and in front of that, let's say that we put a negative charge on the surface, and in front of that, we put a solution of ions. Okay, and based on that, we were calculating both the density of cations, the density of anions, and the potential with respect to the position in the solution. And here we have the z direction and 0. And basically, what we had written so far is, well, first of all, we had introduced a potential phi, which was more or less the potential V, but which was renormalized, and it was EV divided by KT. And what we had shown so far is that the potential verifies an equation that is the Laplacian of phi is equal to 1 over lambda d square times the hyperbolic sinus of phi. I hope you agree about the fact that we were at this point. And we had also written the boundary condition in z equals 0, which was d phi divided by dz was related to the charge at the surface, and it was blah, 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 -2 divided by Lg, where Lg was the degree length, and lambda d was the Debye length. And well, we wanted we were exactly at this point, and what we wanted to do was to solve this equation, and it is what we will try to do today, and it will be the second. I have to deal with the colors. It will be the second point here, which will be solving the Poisson-Boltzmann equation. And the first situation with which we'll try to simplify this equation is to work in the situation where the adimensional potential is smaller than 1, which means that we will solve the linearized Poisson-Boltzmann equation. And this equation, it's called the Debye-Huckel approximation. Well, if we do so, I should write that again. These equations that I called equation 1, it simply become the Laplacian of phi is equal to -1 lambda d square times phi, which is kind of a very simple equation that we can solve, and we can write it like that. Phi of z is an exponential term, which is r exponential minus kappa d times z, where I have written kappa d as the inverse of the lambda length. It's a Debye decay term. And of course, there is also a term which is plus kappa dz that we can neglect because we want that phi tends to 0 when z tends to infinity. So based on that, we can also use the boundary condition, which is that we have written before, which is d phi divided by dz is equal to minus 2 divided by Lg. And here it is minus a exponential minus a kp_d. So basically, what we can write is that phi of z is simply 2 lambda d divided by lambda t exponential of minus kappa d fois z. So here we are able to calculate phi, or phi, I never know how to pronounce that. And if we want to come back to what is the exact quantity that we want to measure, which is v, we simply have to say that v is kt over e times this quantity, which is lambda 2 lambda d divided by Lg exponential minus kappa d times z. And well, I have written that in another form by changing what we know about lambda d and lambda g, and I hope I'm okay. It will be lambda d times sigma over epsilon times the exponential of minus kappa d z. So I think it's okay. I think we are able to solve these. And of course, what we want to also to calculate is the density of ions close to the surface, which are rho plus and rho minus. And rho plus, I remember we have written rho dot, which was the density far from the surface, exponential minus phi, and this was, and if phi is smaller than 1, it will be rho naught times 1 minus phi, and at the end, it will be rho naught times 1 minus, 2 lambda d over lambda t exponential of minus kappa d z. And for the other one, it is rho 0 exponential of plus phi, which is at the end rho naught factor 1 plus 2 lambda d over lambda g exponential of plus minus kappa d. Well, here basically I have written what we had before. I have just solved these equations. So from that, I think that it's possible to show what will the density of charge looks like with respect to the position. So, of course, far from the surface, the density of charge will be homogeneous. Yes, the solution is neutral, Amélie, but it's neutral at large distance from the surface. But close to the surface, the solution is not neutral. That's exactly the point. And then what we'll have is that we'll have two solutions. One is like that, and one is like that, which makes that here it's neutral. Here we have a length scale which is a Debye length, and here I have written n minus, rho minus. Here I have written rho plus, and here I can write the values just because I've calculated them. Here it's 1 0 times 1 minus 2 lambda t over lambda t, rho 0 times, and it's a plus 1 minus 2 lambda t divided by lambda t. Am I right? Yes. And here I am in a situation where I have chosen to write with well, that's a question for you. Is that a situation where sigma is positive or a situation where sigma is negative? Well, here I have written the situation where sigma is positive, which is lambda GUI is positive, and in this situation, what you see is that the density of negative charge is higher close to the surface than the density of positive charge, which is exactly the drawing that we could have. Is that, well, since here I have clearly done a situation where I have written the surface is positive. Here, I clearly attract a lot the negative charge. Of course, when we have this negative charge, above that, we have some positive charge. The ions are not fully condensed on the surface. They are a little bit diffused. And really now we have an interpretation of what is the Debye length. The Debye length is the length over which we have to go in order to screen the surface. And what is really interesting, as noticed by Amélie, is that when we are at length scale which are smaller than the Debye length, the fluid is not in average neutral. We have a breakdown of the electroneutrality. well, to make this calculation, we have made an approximation, which is we have said that well, I will write here. So my question is that true? For classical solutions for salted water? I'll let you think about a little bit about that. Any guess? Yes, Lila, you're right. It depends on the. Of course, the question is what is lambda d over lambda g? So what did we say for the degree length? Which was 2 kt epsilon over sigma e. Yes, we said 1 nanometer. And what did we say for lambda for the Debye length? Yeah, we said 1 micron for pure water, and we said that it could be something smaller. We said that, well, it will be, let's say, 10 nanometer for a concentration of salt of 10 millimole, which clearly says that, well, the Debye-Huckel approximation is wrong. And this makes me really unhappy, because then we will have to deal with the nonlinear Poisson-Boltzmann equation. Can I switch? And, well, and then we have to deal with this equation, which is not sure, sorry, really nice. So how can we solve it? Any guess? You know. It's just to let you write a little bit. And yes. So if you multiply by on both sides by d phi over dv, you should be able to integrate it. And it will be kappa d square. Now the cosine, the hyperbolic cosine, plus a constant. And what is a here? Any clue? How can I find a? Yes, Martin. Well, the idea is that if you take z, which tends to infinity, we'll have both phi, which will go to 0, and d phi over dz is equal to 0. So this is simply kappa d square times cosinus hyperbolic of phi minus 1, which is 2 kappa d square sinus hyperbolic square of phi over 2. Well, from that, we can integrate and see d phi over dz is equal to, well, the square root of that. So it is plus or minus times 2 kappa d times the hyperbolic sinus of phi over 2. And now we have to design for the sign. Yes, given by the boundary condition. So we said that it was here. It was d phi over dz, which was negative. So it is a minus sign. So it is a minus sign, and it is, well, and we can calculate also that the sinus hyperbolic at the surface verifies the equation lambda d over lambda g just by using the equation before. Okay. I don't think that it is a square root of 2 just because we have these 2 here and these 2 here, which make 4. Yes, Audran. Okay. So we have the boundary condition and we have no this equation with the right sign. Well, so this is boring, but you can separate the variables. Or go to Mathematica. Or go to Wolfram Alpha, whatever you want. And solve this equation, and I give you the results. The result is that the tangent hyperbolic of phi verifies this equation. So I just take my notes. Sorry with that exponential. So which makes that I could have written the result directly. Sorry for that. Phi of z is equal. Okay, I just give you the result. And what is nice here is that, well, if we go to kappa d z is larger than 1, then the argument here is smaller than 1. And then we can say that the arctangent is equal to the tangent. And then we can say that phi of z is something which is close to 4 tangents of phi s divided by 4 exponential of 1 kappa d z. So what comments can we do based on that? Can you make any comments? No? You are already tired? Well, the first comment that I will make is that if we deal with, if we are not too close to the surface, if we are far from the surface, I mean, we recover a potential which decreases exponentially with respect to the distance, exactly like in the Debye-Hückel approximation. But what is different here is that the potential at the surface that we measure is not the right one. It's kind of an effective potential. So we see something. Again, yes, Melissa. We still see the exponential decay. We still see something, but it will be difficult. It will be the decay will not allow us to simply measure the charge surface. And this can be, I mean, this can be embarrassing because if what we have said is that what we will have at the surface is that phi s can be larger than 1. And in that situation, what we have is that the effective potential at the surface becomes independent of sigma, which makes that it will not be possible to measure the charge at the surface by simply measuring what is by measuring the potential close to the surface. Yes, it's not lambda sigma. Okay with that? And we will only measure kind of effective sigma, which is affected by all the physics that we have seen before. Okay, so the main message here is that when we have a charged surface, first of all, close to the surface, there is no more the electron neutrality. Secondly, the size over which we have this profile of density due to thermal fluctuation is the Debye length, so that's an important length. Second, and then the Debye-Hückel approximation is usually not valid, even though it's used in a lot of papers. So you have to keep in mind that we shouldn't use, we should use the Debye-Hückel approximation, but only to have an idea of the decay and also to extract kind of an effective charge density at the surface and not the real one. Okay, that's my take-home message. And this is, and this is important in a lot of situations where we deal with real charge surfaces. So again, since I am an experimentalist and I would like to discuss also experiments, my next question is how could we measure that? because I don't like to make, calculations where I have no chance to measure it. Yes, Adrien. Here. Thanks again. So how can we measure that? This kind of equation. Any clue? No. Well, the basic idea is that what we will do is, and finally I will do that. I thought at the beginning that I will do that today, but I changed. Well, if we are dealing with charged surfaces, what they will do is that, well, we will have the counter ions here, and basically, if the distance d between the surface is, let's say, smaller or of the order of the Debye length, what we will see is that we will see a force appearing between the surface. Of course, if d is much larger than the Debye length, the force will be equal to 0, and the force will be equal to 0 just due to the fact that the surface charge are screened by the counter ion. But if we are dealing with surface with distances which are smaller than this length, well, in average, the charged surface is not charged, and there will be a repulsion between the surface. And then, well, the idea is for you, well, we say that the Debye length was something between, let's say, from 10 nanometers to maximum 1 micron. How can we measure forces between surfaces in this range of distances? Okay, that's a PhD thesis. That's an internship offer. Well, you want to measure the force between charged surfaces. You know that you have to approach two surfaces with a distance smaller than 1 micron. So what is a good technique? What are the techniques? Because we can imagine several techniques. Yes, AFM will be a technique. But what is simple from a calculation point of view, what we add is, we have up to now we have dealt with flat surfaces. AFM is round surfaces. A spherical surface. Any other technique? Well, indeed, it's not possible. I mean, we will always have to deal with spherical surfaces because experimentally, I mean, which means that the only thing that is easy to measure is the force between a sphere and a plate, and not the force between two plates, just because experimentally, when we deal with this kind of distance, we will have a problem of parallelism. It won't be possible at all to control the distance between two surfaces here with a parallelism better off than 10 nanometer. So in fact, it's never possible to really measure the force between flat surfaces. Well, so flat surfaces is not the case, so we'll be able to do that either with an IFM or to do that historically with a surface force apparatus that has been invented by Jacob Israelashvili. Do you know the difference between these two apparatus? And then yeah, and the question by Anirban is really interesting. I will try to answer to the question about using the electrical capacitance. Oh, what is SFA? SFA is surface forces apparatus. So let's discuss a little bit that, because I think that this is really interesting. I mean, I think that you all know AFM. In AFM, what you do is that basically you have a cantilever here. You send a laser light on the end of the cantilever, and what you register here on a photodiode is the position of the tip here related to the surface. If you know the stiffness here of the cantilever, well, and you know the deflection, you will be able to measure the force acting on the tip. Well, what is the advantage of the AFM is that, well, you measure small forces. You can buy one. The measurements are easy. But there is one main drawback, or two main drawbacks. The two main drawbacks is, well, it's always difficult to measure K. And it varies from one tip to another one. And the other major difficulty is that you don't know where is the zero. Which means that you are able to change the distance between the sample and the tip, but you don't know the absolute distance. You know the relative displacements between the two surfaces. So this is basically the atomic force microscope. And well, if you make an internship, it will be easy to find one because there are AFM almost everywhere. surface force apparatus is an older setup, which was invented in the 70s, so before the atomic force microscope. And the difference is basically that here the tip in the AFM is nanometric. And in the surface force apparatus, what they are using is that they are using mica surfaces. And why mica? Just because mica, you can cleave it, and you can have it with a roughness smaller than 1 nanometer. And they are making big objects, so they are not making spheres, they are making cylinders. Well, and now it becomes nasty. Not that bad. They are making cylinders with a radius of curvature of around 1 centimeter, because they glue the mica on glass. And the idea is that, well, doing that, they are able to measure they are able to approach properly the two surfaces, since they are dealing with two cylinders without having any problem of parallelism. But then how do they measure the distance between the surface? Well, to measure the distance between the surface, they send in between the two surfaces, since mica is transparent, here in between the surfaces, you create interferences. And if you analyze the light which goes through using a UV spectrometer, you are really able to measure the distance. Well, if you want to have nice interferences, what you need to do is to change a little bit the setup. So you have to put some a metallized layer on the top here. Usually that's argent. And why do you do that? Just to have several waves in your interferometers and to create a Fabry-Perot interferometer. And well, by doing that, you are really able to measure distances with the same precision than on the AFM, but you are able to measure absolute distances. Okay. So the SFA there is a book in my bibliography. There is a book by this guy, Jacob Israelashvili, and he has used this kind of technique to measure all the forces that we will deal with in the next lecture. So forces between surfaces with polymers, Hamaker constant, forces between surfaces with depletion, and so on. So all the what we call the molecular forces in soft matter have been measured historically with the SFA. Okay. And of course, what is interesting here is that since they are dealing with larger distance, the force that are measured are bigger. So you will say, well, why do people use AFM instead of SFA? Well, there are several drawbacks. First of all, it's not that easy to buy one. So it's not that available. And well, it's really a difficult experiment. And why it's difficult? It's difficult because you have to be ultra clean. Because since you are dealing with big surfaces, I mean, you really need to avoid dust here that are a nightmare in the experiment. Whereas here in the IFM, if you have some dusts, you don't care because you can do the experiments in between two dusts. So IFM experiments are much easier than the surface force apparatus experiments. Okay, so well, to measure the force at small distances, you have all these techniques available. And then it was possible to measure the force and to look at the decay of the Debye length. Okay, so that's it for the description of the charge description close to the surface, and we will now enter in the third chapter, which deals with the fluctuation of interfaces. Oops. So my headset rings, so maybe I won't have any battery left after that. And the first thing that I want to discuss today is the question of the no, sorry. Well, no. What I want to discuss here are the fluctuation of a liquid vapor interface. Oops. And first, let's calculate what we want to calculate are the statistical properties of an interface. So basically what we want to describe today is that, well, let's assume that what we want to describe is the thermal fluctuation it becomes really nasty. What we want to describe are the capillary wave, the thermal capillary wave at an interface. Okay, I think that I will have to change these because to some point it will stop. Can you hear me like that? Are you still hearing me?
Yes, a little bit less, but we can.
Okay, sorry for that. I just come back.
2 minutes. Okay, sorry. Well, the question here is now we have a liquid here, and above that we have the vapor. Well, if nothing happens, the surface is flat. And the question is, well, if there is some noise or if there is some temperature, the surface will not be flat. And the idea is, well, what will be the amplitude h of the fluctuation with respect to time. So here we assume that the average position is chosen to be equal to 0. And what we want to know is how does the surface of a liquid fluctuate due to thermal agitation. So my first question is, well, so here you see that in average, the 8 will be equal to 0. So what we will have to characterize is the average among time of the square of that. That I will write h square. So my first question is, well, can you make a guess? Of the amplitude of this fluctuation? Well, Gosset says LC square. Let's forget the factor of 2. Yeah, I mean, this is huge. I mean, it cannot be like that. I mean, you know that the thermal fluctuation of a liquid cannot be something like that. And well, I think that Amelie's answer is something which seems a little bit better. And she says KT over gamma. And well, and so this is for the square root of Amélie. This is for the average amplitude of the length scale. So, and this is usually, how big is that? Well, it's 1 nanometer or less, which tells that usually thermal fluctuations are neglectable or small. Well, it's not always the case, so we can want to characterize more properly this kind of distribution. So what we want to do is, well, can you calculate? So here Sorry for that. I remake my, I do my drawing again. So I have so what I would like to know is what is the excess of free energy, which is due to the fact that the surface is not flat. So first of all, we can do that in 1D. And we will generalize it a little bit later. I let you propose something. I let you write what will be the excess. So the reference state will be the flat surface, of course. And what I want to calculate here is the excess of energy related to that. I let you make a guess and send me the answer either in the chat or by putting your microphone on. So there are two terms. One term is related to the fact that there is an increase of the surface. And one term which is related to the fact that you gain some gravitational, some potential energy. Yes, something like that. So what Lila proposed is something like, well, let's say gamma. So what you say is, I'm okay with that. Oops. Well, and then I think that I have to subtract the flat case. And I have to add the gravitational energy, which will be rho g h square over 2 dx. So which will be gamma dx times 1 plus hx square minus 1 plus rho j h square. Sorry for the gamma that I should put here. Ah. Well, and if I write something like that, I probably will have to write the distance in the Ly direction if the system is invariant in the other direction. So if I do something like that, I will be able to say that the free energy now in the 3 decays will be, well, let's say the sum over the surfaces of this term. Qu'est-ce que ça fait chier? Pardon. 1 plus the gradient of the position square minus 1 plus rho g h square. And well, if we assume that the slope are small, we'll simply take say that this is more or less the sum of the surface times gamma delta h square, like that, plus 1 delta square, and then plus a constant term that I can neglect. So I let you think about that. Because I think it's an important point of this calculation. I want to be sure that you all agree with this. You all agree, usually, you all agree with this 2 term here? Yes? Okay. So now, well, this is kind of the technical part that I want to do a little bit slowly, but maybe not too slowly. The way we will have to solve this equation in order to find to study the fluctuation will be to solve these what happens with the 1/2 factor. I missed it. Sorry, we solve that in the Fourier space, which tells us that we will write the Fourier mode of the surface that are given by this definition of the Fourier transform, and here the K vector, they are vector which are 2pn over Lx, 2pm over Ly, where Lx and Ly are the size of the dimension of the surface. Well, with this convention, just to note, we'll say that H of R will be 1 over A, the sum of the HK times and we sum over the K vector. Okay with that? Well, why are we doing that? We are doing that because with this kind of Fourier transform, we can calculate the delta F, well, 3D, and I will write delta F 3D again. So we can calculate the energy associated with these, and this energy can be related to the value of this mode, and it's 1 over A, the sum over the different modes of what? Of 1/2 of gamma K square plus rho G times the modulus, and I again forget the 1/2. Do you agree with that?
Why this is discrete now?
Sorry.
Using...
No, you're right.
Okay.
And so here I have used the Parseval equality. And what is interesting here is that here we can say that the free energy well, sorry for, I think that for the moment, well, I have the choice to be directly in discrete or not. Well, let's write it like that. Maybe I'm not completely correct with a mathematical point of view, but I can write something like that. No, I think, sorry for that. I think that I will rather stay here with discrete mode. Because here, if not, I think I'm not completely correct. Yes. The position is a continuous variable, but if I go in the if I do this kind of calculation, the modes are discrete. And what is remarkable here, Julien said, I am a bit confused with the gravity term. When h is negative, what I said here, I just say that when I have a surface here of 8h, the position of this is mgh over 2, and the mass is rho g dxh. So the gravity term is rho g h squared over 2 sorry, the small energy of this term is this one. No? Well, we can discuss that later, maybe.
Okay.
No?
Si.
Well, sorry for that. And here, what is interesting here is that the free energy, it's proportional to the amplitude to the modes to the power 2, a sin of h factor. Yeah, to be completely honest, I mean, I will be honest with you. I never thought about it like that. Of course, it could be something like that. Yeah, I have to think about it. Why? I mean, why? Yeah. So yeah, not smooth. Yes. So I come back to this. Sorry, and what we have is that the amplitude is we have a sum of quadratic terms. And then what we can use the equipartition theorem. And then we'll say that in average, this can be simply related to KT A times gamma kappa 2 plus rho g. That can be rewritten a little bit, KT over gamma times 1 plus kappa 2 plus kappa 2, where kappa -1 is the capillary length, sorry. So which tells that the amplitude of the modes depends of k. Which is a little bit obvious. But here we can calculate the amplitude. So the question is of Adrien. What happens to the sum? Sorry, Adrien, here, I just said that I will use a discrete sum for the. I will discrete modes for the sum. So there is no decay. Okay, so from that, since now we have the modes, we have the average value of the modes, we can calculate h square, which is 1 over a, the sum of the h square times the sum over the surface. And here it can be related to the amplitude of the modes. If now, that's here that I will come back to the discrete, to the continuous sum. Which is 2 pi to the square times hk square. And here again, I am using the Parseval theorem. And if I make, well, all the calculation, it's 1 over a, I take my note, sum kt a over gamma kt plus rho j times 1 over gamma. No. K2 plus kappa square, and this becomes 2 pi k dk, since we are in 2D. And it is at the end kt over 2 pi times 1 over gamma, sum of k dk divided by k square plus kappa square. And then we can integrate, and it is kt.
Sir?
Yes?
So I really don't get if we are working with discrete k or continuous k, because you use both.
Yeah, I'm more going from one to the other one.
We can do that.
I mean, what I think is that here, to be a little bit clearer, sorry. When I am here, in order to use I mean, up to here, let's say, I was in a discrete mode.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I wanted to go back in the direct space, and it was easier to use the
continuous
the
description.
continuous case. So
Okay.
here I switched to continuous case. I mean, and we can discuss a little bit why. I mean, I'm allowed to do that. It is what I have. What I have to know is what is the range of k that I deal with, which is the rail of wavelengths that I deal with, and the wavelengths I am dealing with, they are always larger than the molecular size. And since they are always larger than the molecular size, I mean, it will be okay to work in the continuous limit. But up to now, if I want to write properly, sorry for that. I mean, it's not proper. It's not that nice. But if I want to write easily the equipartition theorem, it will be easier to have a discrete number of wave vectors.
Okay, but so you can do this properly. Okay, you convinced me. Thank you.
Okay. And then I go to KT over at the end 4 pi gamma times that. You can take again, you can take Mathematica or so on. The only point is that, well, you have to go from Kmax. You have to write the two limits. So since K is 2 pi over lambda, there is one limit so what are the two wave vectors that we will put here? So what is Kmax? Well, here Kmax will be 2 pi over A, where A is the molecular size. There is a natural cutoff here. And Kmin, well, it will be something like 2 times pi divided by L, the size of the box. And we can take it close to 0. We can say that, well, this will be small. And if we say that, the amplitude h square will be, we can calculate, and it will be 2 pi over a k pi. Okay. So, well, we are happy because here we have a divergence. Except if we go except if we go in some particular case, well, this term should be among the constants, so we recover that the order of magnitude of the fluctuation are kt divided by gamma. if 1 over I cap kappa is smaller than 1. And this is simply smaller than, no, bigger than 1. Which is the capillary is that right? H square is égal sur T sur gamma, si 2pi sur si ça c'est négligeable. Yeah. Which is A over kappa minus 1 I make an error. 2 T. Okay. Voilà. No, sorry. Did I make something wrong? Tac, 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 KT over gamma, ça c'est juste. No, it seems okay. So I have to think about it, but sorry with that. Sorry, what is remarkable here also is that if gamma tends to 0, which will be the case if we are in close to a critical point, you see that the H square tends to infinity, which tells us that we will have a divergence. We'll have a huge divergence of the amplitude of the thermal capillary waves. Okay, and can we make some other comments? Maybe we can say that, well, if G tends to 0, kappa dots tends to the capillary length, sorry, tends to infinity. And in this case, we have a problem here with this equation. Yeah, sorry, I come back to what I wanted to say. We have a problem here, and the cutoff should be the size of the box. Sorry with that. Okay, so again, we have said that, well, we'll be able to measure some fluctuation of the, we are able to measure the roughness of the interface. So the roughness of the interface, usually it's nanometric. And the question again for me, sorry, is, how can we measure that? Sorry, I was a little bit missed in my calculation, and then I wasn't clear at the end. So how will you measure that? Any clue? Yeah, the question is how, the question is how can we measure the thermal fluctuation of the interface with respect to we have made a calculation here. And I'm always willing to try to find a way of measuring things I've calculated. Julien proposed strioscopy. Well, it will not be that easy. Probably due to the fact that, well, here we have said that the thermal fluctuations are really nanometric in most of the case. So strioscopy could be a solution, and it's not that easy. Well, I will just show you a device that is not the one that is it's not using strioscopy, but it's using optical technique. So it's an experiment that has been done by Basile Potier at ESPCI. It was a PhD student working with Laurent Stalini and Christian Frétigny. And what they have done is not measuring exactly what we have measured so far. What they have measured is, sorry for everything is in French here, because it comes from the thesis of Basile. So the idea is basically, lentille is lens in English. Échantillon is sample. Prism is prism without the E. So here we have everything in English. So basically what he has done is he has sent a laser on the solid surface using a prism. So, and there is a reflection of the light on the surface. And the light is reflected, it comes back to the prism, and then there are some fluctuations on the surface. When you do that, he has measured so he has here he has a signal A as a function of t, a signal B as a function of t, which are the signals obtained on two photodiodes, and then he has made the correlation between these two functions. And look at it. And this allows him to measure not directly the amplitude. It was not only the amplitude of the oscillations that we have calculated so far, but he has calculated the spectrum of the fluctuation of the interfaces. So he has more than what we have calculated. And if you look at the spectrum of the oscillation, what he has been able to see is that, well, first of all, there is kind of a cutoff here, a cutoff frequency. Among the fluctuation. And well, in order to understand this cutoff frequency, it is related to the idea that in his experiment, what he has is, I mean, the laser beams act as a filter, which means that with this setup, you are not able to measure all the fluctuations on of the surface of the sample. You are only able to measure the ones which are big compared to the size of the beam. If you look at high spatial frequency, see here, you will make an average and you are not able to see that, which explains that why here there is kind of impossibility of measuring what happens at high frequency. So there is kind of a low pass filter. And what is nice with this setup is that, well, he was able to do it as an example here. That's an experiment which has been done with different silicon oils. And with different silicon oils, he was able to measure the spectrum. So again, at high frequency, you see this low pass filter effect. But at low frequency, he was able to measure the effect of the viscosity, because he was able to measure the damping of these thermal capillary waves. So that's a very nice experiment. And what is nice here is that, well, doing that, you have really able to make some rheology of your fluid layer just by, I mean, you don't have to touch him, you just have to let thermal fluctuation act on your liquid, and really you only use the ambient thermal noise as an excitation to make your rheometry measurement. So I really like this experiment. And I just want to show you another experiment that has been done by Arts and co-workers. Not this one. So that's a paper in Science, 2004, by a group led by Henk Le Kerkerker in Netherlands. And what they have done is, well, basically they have used a small PMMA sphere, so that's described here. And this PMMA sphere, they are put in water, not in water, in a fluid with a polystyrene. And what you can have regarding the concentration of particle and the concentration of polymer, if you can have a fast separation. Which means that what they have at the end is they have a system like that. Oops. Where here they have a system which is rich in particle, because it has precipitate, and above that they have kind of a gas of particle. So it's kind of a real liquid gas, but it's not a gas made of atoms. It's a gas made of particles. And if you do this kind of things, if here you see some confocal imaging of the surface, and here you probably, I don't know if you see it properly, but you clearly see the roughness of the surface here. Okay, so you can directly measure the fluctuation in the real space. So they have measured H of Q. Sorry, they have really measured the different amplitude of the different modes that exactly we have calculated before. And based on that, what is nice here is that they were able, by extracting the experiments, they were able to measure the value of the surface tension. Since we have predicted what should be, we know everything with regard to the surface tension. So we know, or here with respect to the mode, so we know how the mode should decay with respect to the surface tension. And if they do that, they measure some value of the surface tension, and you see two things. First of all, the value here are much smaller than the one we are used to. Usually we have, for water as an example, the value of the surface tension, as discussed with David Quéré, is smaller, is something like that. Or if you take an alkane, you will say, okay, you will have value of the surface tension of a couple of millinewton per meters. So you have something which is much smaller. And well, what you see is that even though it's small, there are some concentration for which gamma really tends to 0. And here, what you will observe experimentally, and they have observed that is that when you go to this kind of very low surface tension, you go to a spontaneous emulsification. Exactly because there is no cost anymore of creating the surface. So here, here you really see that, first of all, this kind of calculation of the thermal fluctuation of the interface is not only a nasty and complicated calculation where we deal with the Fourier space. It's something which can be really used in order to make real measurements in the real life. And that this thermal fluctuation, in some cases, they can be really measured directly, easily. The only thing that I have to say is that, well, these experiments, usually they are not easy because you have something that will kill any of your measurement, and you have to take care when you are dealing with this kind of measurement. It is that you have to deal with the vibration. Because of course, if you have vibration on your sample, you will have waves which are nothing related to the waves which are excited by the temperature. So these experiments, they are really difficult to perform just because we deal with these kind of things. And usually what people have measured is they precisely measure some peaks in the spectrums, which corresponds to the spectra, to the mechanical excitation of their environment. Okay. Well, with that, I think that I'm almost finished. I have not the time to go on with the second part of the lecture. I just want to give you, to tell you what we will do next time. I mean, what we have done today is, well, we have discussed the statistical properties of the interface, where the cost of the fluctuation is simply the fact that you increase the surface of your liquid gas interface. But there is something which is also interesting in soft matter. It is the case of biological membranes, because biological membranes, they not only have a surface tension, but they have an elasticity. They have kind of a bending rigidity. And this bending rigidity of the membranes interface, that's really important in biophysics and in a lot of applications. And we will see next time that the thermal fluctuation of an interface can be a way to measure the bending rigidity of the interface exactly in the same way that we have done today to measure the surface tension. Okay, so it will be the beginning of the next lecture. And then we will jump to the other chapter. So this chapter was pretty short on the thermal fluctuation interface, and we will deal with forces. So we'll discuss about osmotic forces. We will calculate the forces due to the charge and so on. Okay, and we will discuss again about the techniques to measure the forces. So that's it for today. Well, I'm happy to answer to any question, and well, if you want to have a break before the tutorials, you are more than welcome to do that.